It began on a quiet Friday evening in a small Vermont town where winter arrived early and the streets looked calm under fresh snow. Inside a warm apartment on the second floor of a brick building, Emily Carter stood near a wide window with a cup of tea in her hand, watching snowflakes drift slowly under the streetlights. The town felt peaceful, but something unusual had been happening during the last few evenings. Something Emily could not fully explain. People walking on the sidewalk often slowed down near their building. Some even paused for a moment. First, Emily assumed they were simply enjoying the snow or checking their phones. But then she noticed their eyes moving upward, toward the apartment window where the lights glowed softly. Emily shifted slightly and leaned closer to the glass. Two neighbors across the street had stopped again. They were talking quietly, but every few seconds one of them glanced toward the window. Emily felt a strange mix of curiosity and embarrassment. She stepped back from the window and turned toward the living room where Daniel Brooks sat on the couch reading a book. Soft jazz music played in the background, and the apartment smelled like dinner that had just finished cooking. The space felt warm, calm, and full of small details that made it feel alive. Plants on shelves, a blanket over the couch, paintings Emily had made over the past few months. "You're doing it again," Daniel said with a small smile. Noticing her expression, Emily sighed lightly. "They're looking again." Daniel closed his book and tilted his head. "Looking at what?" "At us," Emily said. "Or maybe just the apartment. I don't know." Daniel stood up and walked toward the window. He wasn't worried. Daniel rarely worried about small things. His calm personality had always balanced Emily's habit of noticing every detail around her. When he reached the window, he looked outside casually. The two neighbors were still there, standing near a streetlight, speaking softly. One of them glanced up again. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Okay," he admitted, "maybe you're not imagining it." Emily folded her arms and laughed a little. "See? I told you." Daniel leaned against the wall beside the window, studying the street for a moment. Snow was falling gently now, covering the sidewalks in a thin white layer. Cars moved slowly, headlights glowing through the quiet night. The neighborhood was not busy, but it was the kind of place where people noticed each other. Over the last few weeks, Emily and Daniel had begun to notice small things happening more often. Someone across the street opening their curtains in the evening. A woman walking her dog who would pause for a few seconds near their building. A group of teenagers who passed by twice in one night, laughing quietly but still looking up at the window. Emily had first noticed it when she was painting near the window one night. She liked working there because the streetlights created a peaceful atmosphere, and Daniel usually played music while cooking dinner. She remembered glancing up and seeing a couple outside, smiling as they passed. At the time, it felt harmless, almost sweet. But as days passed, the pattern became clearer. People were curious about the window. Daniel finally spoke. "Maybe people, just like the lights." Emily looked at him skeptically. "The lights?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "Think about it. Most apartments close their curtains early, but ours is always open. Music playing, someone painting, someone cooking. Probably looks interesting." Emily thought about that. She turned back toward the window and noticed the neighbors had started walking again, disappearing slowly down the snowy street. "It's still a little strange," she said. Daniel shrugged. "Maybe." He walked to the kitchen and poured himself some water. Emily followed him, but her mind stayed on the street outside. Something about the situation felt unusual, but it also wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it made the apartment feel more alive, like the outside world was gently connected to their small space. Daniel leaned against the counter and looked at her thoughtfully. "You know what I think is actually happening?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I think people see something here that they don't see very often." "And what is that supposed to mean?" Emily asked. Daniel smiled softly. "A calm place." Emily paused. Before Daniel came into her life, calm had not been a word she would use to describe her relationships. Her previous relationship had ended badly, leaving her with doubts about trust and whether peaceful love even existed. Daniel knew that story well, but he never forced her to talk about it more than she wanted. Instead, he showed her patience. In quiet ways, making coffee in the morning, remembering small things she said, and never rushing her when she needed space. Slowly, their life together had become something steady. Maybe people could see that from outside. Emily walked back toward the window and looked down the street again. The snow had become heavier now, making everything look softer. For a moment, no one was there. Then a car stopped at the intersection and someone inside glanced toward the apartment building. Emily laughed quietly. "Okay," she said. "That's definitely real." Daniel joined her again. "So what do we do?" Emily asked. "Close the curtains." Daniel looked at the window thoughtfully. Imagine the view from the street, warm lights, soft music, to people talking and living their lives normally. Nothing dramatic, just quiet happiness. After a moment, he shook his head. "No," he said. Emily looked surprised. "No, no," Daniel repeated. "Let them watch." Emily stared at him for a second, unsure if he was joking. "Sounds like something from a movie," she said. Daniel laughed. "Maybe, but think about it. Everyone's busy, stressed, tired. If someone walks by and sees something peaceful, maybe it makes their night a little better." Emily leaned against the window frame, thinking about his words. She had always been observant about people, and she knew how lonely evenings could feel for some. She remembered walking home alone months ago after her last breakup, noticing happy couples through restaurant windows and feeling both sad and hopeful at the same time. Maybe Daniel was right. Still, she crossed her arms playfully. "If this becomes weird, I'm blaming you." Daniel grinned. "Fair." That night, they left the curtains open as usual. They cleaned the kitchen together, laughing about a small argument they had earlier about whether Daniel's pasta recipe needed more garlic. Then they moved to the couch, talking about their plans for the weekend. Outside, a few people passed. Slowly, one woman walking her dog smiled when Emily accidentally waved again. The next evening, it happened again. Emily was painting near the window while Daniel worked on his laptop at the table. Snow had stopped, but the street still glowed under streetlights. A group of neighbors passed by and paused briefly, looking toward the apartment. This time, Emily didn't feel embarrassed. Instead, she simply continued painting, smiling slightly. Daniel noticed them too. "You see?" he said quietly. "Harmless." Emily nodded. Days passed, and something interesting started happening. Other windows began staying open longer in the evening. At first, Emily thought she was imagining it. But across the street, a couple began sitting near their own window at night. A few doors down, someone started playing guitar where it could be heard faintly outside. The neighborhood slowly felt less closed off, as if people were becoming more comfortable being seen living their lives. Daniel noticed it one evening while making coffee. "Think we started something," he said. Emily laughed. Being dramatic again. But when she looked outside, she realized he might be right. The street felt different, warmer, connected. However, one evening, about a week later, something unexpected happened. Emily was standing by the window again, adjusting a plant, when she noticed someone she had never seen before standing near the sidewalk. A man in his early 30s, wearing a dark jacket, stood under a streetlight. He wasn't walking, he wasn't talking to anyone. He was just standing there, looking up. Emily felt a small chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The man wasn't smiling like other people who passed by. His expression was quieter, almost thoughtful, maybe even a little sad. Daniel walked into the room and noticed Emily staring outside. "What is it?" he asked. Emily nodded toward the street. Daniel looked down and saw the man. They both stayed silent for a moment. The man didn't move right away. He simply looked at the warm light coming from their window, as if he were thinking about something far away. Then, after a minute, he slowly turned and walked down the street. Emily let out a small breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That felt different," she said. Daniel nodded slightly. He said, neither of them knew it yet. But that quiet moment was about to change the story of their street and maybe their own lives too. The week after the first sighting of the man outside their building, Emily and Daniel noticed that the neighborhood had begun to change in small, almost invisible ways. At first, it was subtle. Windows that were usually closed stayed open longer. Into the evening, music drifted softly from apartments, not just theirs. Across the street, a young couple laughed quietly while cooking dinner. Another neighbor painted by their own window, a brush in hand, colors flickering under warm lamplight. The street, once a quiet passage of people rushing home or walking dogs, had begun to feel alive with small glimpses of daily life. Emily noticed the warmth in it as she watered her plants near the window. "Daniel," she whispered, leaning closer to the glass, "I think we started something." Daniel, pouring himself coffee in the kitchen, looked out at the softly lit street, a faint smile on his face. "Yeah," he said simply, "we did." Emily's attention, however, was drawn back to the man, the same one she had seen days ago. He was standing under the streetlight again, watching quietly. There was nothing threatening in his stance. He didn't move, didn't speak. His gaze was steady, focused, almost hesitant. Daniel came beside her on the balcony and followed her. Line of sight. "I see him," he said, not the same curiosity as the others. Emily's chest tightened. Something about the man made the quiet street feel heavier. It was like he carried a story in his eyes, a story that had paused outside their window, waiting for something he hadn't yet found. She wanted to wave but hesitated, unsure if that would scare him. Daniel, sensing her hesitation, leaned slightly closer. "Maybe he just needs to see it one more time," he said. The next evening, as snow lightly coated the sidewalks, the man returned. This time, Daniel stepped out onto the small balcony. "Hey," he called down warmly. The man startled slightly, blinking at the sudden voice. "Cold night to be standing there," Daniel added casually. The man looked down, embarrassed. "Yeah. I didn't mean to stare," he said quietly. "You're not bothering anyone?" Daniel reassured him. There was a pause, a silence filled only with the soft hum of distant streetlights. Then the man spoke again, introducing himself as Ryan. Emily and Daniel exchanged a glance, sensing the cautious sincerity in him. Ryan explained in clipped, careful words that he had been through a breakup months earlier, and evenings had been the hardest time. Walking home felt empty, routine, hollow. Then he passed their building one night and saw their window. The soft lights, the calm, the life unfolding inside. It had reminded him that some forms of warmth and happiness were still possible. Ryan's voice held a quiet vulnerability. He admitted he had kept returning standing outside, because watching their small, ordinary routines, the cooking, the laughter, the music made him feel something he hadn't felt in months, something peaceful. Emily's heart softened as she listened. She understood that kind of longing. She had felt it herself after her own heartbreak. Daniel, ever calm, nodded, letting Ryan speak without interruption. Emily stepped closer to him and smiled gently. "You will find it again," she said softly. "People don't stop loving forever." Ryan's expression softened, a mixture of relief and gratitude crossing his face. It wasn't a romantic moment, but it held warmth, shared understanding, and a human connection that went deeper than any casual greeting. Over the following days, Ryan's presence on the street gradually changed. He didn't linger outside as often, not because the connection was broken, but because he had started to engage more with the people around him. He began speaking with neighbors, joining conversations, helping move furniture, offering small kindnesses. Each act was small, almost invisible, but it carried weight, showing that his initial pause outside Emily and Daniel's window had been more than mere curiosity, had been a first step toward reclaiming parts of life he had lost. Emily and Daniel noticed these changes, quietly proud. Their simple decision to leave the curtains open had sparked something larger than they expected. Their life, their openness, had become a beacon of normalcy, comfort, and quiet joy. The neighborhood had begun to mirror the warmth that had existed inside their apartment, as if a single open window could ignite connections throughout a block. One evening, as Emily and Daniel sat by their window, they noticed Ryan across the street again, this time with someone new. A woman stood beside him, her laughter carrying faintly across the street. Ryan's posture had changed. He was no longer tense or hesitant. He appeared lighter, more present, engaged with the world instead of observing it from a distance. Emily smiled softly. "Looks like someone found a new window to stand under," she whispered. Daniel laughed quietly, the sound mingling with the soft music in the apartment. "I told you," he said, leaning back against the wall. "Letting people watch wasn't a bad idea." Emily rested her head lightly against him, feeling the quiet satisfaction of seeing positive change ripple outward from their little world. The snow outside had thickened again, and the warm lights of the apartment reflected off the falling flakes, creating a soft glow that felt almost magical. But it wasn't magic. 'Twas human kindness, understanding, and the gentle ripple of connection that began with something as simple as an open window. Emily thought about Ryan, about the loneliness he carried, about the subtle shift that allowed him to feel hope again. She thought about her own past, about Daniel's patience, and how small acts of presence could transform not only the lives of others, but one's own life as well. Emily and Daniel continued their routines, their days filled with quiet moments, cooking, painting, reading, and talking, while the neighborhood slowly embraced the rhythm of observation, reflection, and subtle human connection. People no longer watched out of mere curiosity. Their presence became a form of quiet participation in a shared human experience. Someone played guitar in the apartment above. Children laughed as their parents waved from balconies. Strangers shared smiles while passing by. It was no longer about watching Emily and Daniel alone. It was about observing life unfolding, acknowledging it, and feeling less lonely because someone else was alive, experiencing similar moments. Weeks passed, and the street had transformed entirely. Ryan and the woman across from them became regular figures of laughter and engagement. Neighbors began opening windows even earlier in the evenings. Music, conversation, and shared gestures of kindness filled the space between buildings. Emily realized that a single choice to leave the curtains open, to live openly, and to let others witness their life had seeded a quiet revolution of connection. Daniel noticed it too, and often remarked on it with a quiet pride, his calm presence grounding Emily as they watched the small changes ripple outward. One snowy night, as Emily leaned against Daniel's shoulder by the window, she noticed the reflections of light on the snow, the faint glow from other apartments, and the gentle movement of people along the street. It felt complete in a way she hadn't expected. She turned to Daniel. "Do you ever think about how small things can change everything?" she asked softly. Daniel smiled. "All the time," he said. "Even the smallest gestures, the simplest choices, can make a world of difference." Emily nodded, her gaze returning to the street. The snow fell silently, blanketing the ground, and she realized the world outside their window was no longer separate from their life inside. It had become a shared space of warmth, hope, and gentle human connection. In the following days, the quiet influence of their apartment continued to spread. Neighbors who had been reserved began speaking with one another. Someone who had been lonely now had people to exchange a few words with each day. Even Ryan, who had begun as a quiet observer, had transformed into a participant, smiling, laughing, and sharing small kindnesses with those around him. Emily and Daniel often watched this unfold with quiet satisfaction, knowing they had played no active role other than simply existing in their space openly and authentically. They had offered a glimpse of what normal, gentle happiness looked like, and in doing so, had reminded others that life could be ordinary, yet meaningful. The apartment remained the same inside, warm and filled with light. Emily painted near the window, Daniel read or cooked, and their laughter occasionally mingled with the faint sounds of the street. Outside, people paused to watch life continue, not in envy or judgment, but in quiet acknowledgement of shared existence. Every evening, the snow reflected the soft glow of the streetlights, creating a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. Emily and Daniel realized that their small act of openness had connected people in ways they had never imagined. They felt a deep sense of purpose in their ordinary shared moments. Then, one night, Emily noticed something that made her smile even more. Across the street, Ryan and the woman stood by their window, holding mugs of coffee, watching the snowfall. Together, their posture was relaxed, their expressions bright, and their laughter echoed faintly. Emily felt a quiet joy, knowing that the man who had once stood alone outside their window, uncertain and hesitant, had found companionship, warmth, and hope again. Daniel squeezed her hand, understanding the depth of her emotion without a word. In that moment, the apartment, the street, the neighbors, and even the snowfall seemed part of the same story, woven together by quiet acts of presence, patience, and care.